So that's one myth that I really think is important to dispel, that bringing in more non-monogamy into our lives, the society, does not automatically mean taking away family.
Welcome back to Open Late Podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Spandiari. And today I have truly someone that I'm so inspired by. Frankly, I was a little nervous before you came over because Dr. Zhana is an NYU professor of sexuality. She's working on a book. She has a course called Open Smarter and has been pumping out so much inspiring and liberating content for people who I think just want to be themselves and feel safe and know that it's okay to be a sexual being for the last couple of years, at least that I've been following your journey and everything you share.
It's been a bit longer than that, but
Well, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Yeah.
It's exciting.
And welcome to LA.
Yes, I'm enjoying LA so far.
Yeah, It must be nice to get out of New York this time of year.
Yeah, you can't be 60, 65 in December. So
Yeah. Do you teach mostly in person? I meant to ask you this earlier.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, NYU actually stayed in person through the entire pandemic, or it gave you the option to teach in person as well as on Zoom. And so some people chose to only teach on Zoom. Some of us chose to teach hybrid, and I chose hybrid the entire time because I wanted to get out of the house, have a reason to get out of the house, and actually be in person. So yeah, and I still continue to teach this hybrid class. So students come, whoever wants to come to class in person, they do, and then the rest are on Zoom at the same time. So
Great. Do you find that in being in person with people resonates more?
Oh my God, yeah, a million times more.
Yeah, totally. That's kind of why I was like, I hope we can do this in person.
Yeah,
because
it worked out so well.
Virtual is great, but here you are in the flesh.
This is better. And I get to see your lovely home here.
Thank you.
Beautiful.
It is. It's kind of a sanctuary, as we talked about earlier, because the other work that I do is often in this home as well, which, believe it or not, the whole downstairs transforms.
Nice.
Anyway, I mean, so many things that I want to talk to you about, and we'll just dive right into the non-monogamy stuff because, as everyone who listens to the show knows, that's mostly what we talk about. And I think your perspective as an educator and someone who created a course to truly guide people to open their relationships, what was the first inkling? I guess, why did you feel like there was a need for a course?
Oh my God. There is so much need for resources for people opening up. This whole world of non-monogamy in that negotiated, disclosed, consensual, ethical, however you want to call it, way is a fairly new phenomenon in the world. Non-monogamy is not new. Non-monogamy has existed for as long as humans have existed. If we define non-monogamy as having multiple sexual and or romantic partners. However, this very intentional way of going about deciding we're going to do it together, having conversations to set the agreements and boundaries and make sure that everyone's on board, that we're processing everything that happens in the right way, that we're treating everyone involved well. So all of that is very new. We have very few role models for how to do it. There's very little information. Over the last 10, 20 years, we've started to amass a lot more research on the topic, which has been great and which has served as the basis of a lot of the stuff that is in the course. However, and we have more and more books and podcasts and workshops that people are doing, but there was still no one place where people can go kind of step by step through that process that is based in like reality and science in a lot of both practice and research for how to do these things. Because if you don't know how to do it, there's a very good chance you're going to screw it up because it is playing with fire. It is more risky than doing monogamy on a number of different levels. Certainly, there's social risks that we incur because of the social stigma and the tabooness of it. There are potential risks to the stability and security of the existing relationship that we're in, all of the difficult emotions that can come up when we're doing non-monogamy, all the jealousies, insecurities, all of that we need to know, how to deal with that, because in monogamy, you shut it down.
Yeah.
And so you don't have to deal with it. But here you can't just shut it down. So you have to learn how to deal with it.
Right.
So all of those, and of course, there are more sexual health risks and so on, consent risks, because you're engaging with people who you don't necessarily know as well as your, long-term partner. So there's just a lot of stuff, a lot of skills and tools, psychological and practical tools, that people who are going to do this need to have in order to do it well, in a way that maximizes pleasure and minimizes harm for themselves and other people. And that's what was
beautiful.
Was the impetus for creating the course.
And Open Smarter covers all of that.
Open Smarter pretty much covers all of that. Yeah. It's a big course and lots of modules. There's 12 modules, 13 modules actually, that go through kind of all of these different areas. And, people can take it on their own time, take as much or as little time as they need. They can get a lot of benefit even from the very beginning. So the further you go, sort of the deeper into some of the weeds of all of the different skills and tools you get.
I've definitely started to dabble. I purchased this course, even though I am open, as everybody knows, and have been for almost a decade, because I'm so interested in how to really navigate this, because I did it blindly. So what resources are people getting nowadays? And I mean, I love your response to this question, like, why do we need this? One of the main reasons that I always look for what are the new resources is because I've found, just as I started this podcast and I've been public, so many more people want to open. And I think that there aren't enough trained sort of educators and therapists. Every time I have someone else who reaches out, on the podcast, who wants support, they either want one-on-one or coaching. Most of the people who do that work, either in person or on Zoom, are completely booked and full. And the other sort of issue that I see, and I'm curious your opinion on this, is you made a post about this the other day. There aren't so many, professionals who are trained in this kind of relationship. They don't have their own experiences, and they've maybe never took a supplemental course about it, and so then they're sort of informing their work with their clients or their patients by this, not only just inexperience, but also their preconceived judgments of it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
There's definitely a shortage of mental health professionals who are trained and non-judgmental about non-monogamy. In fact, there is a lot of the older guard. I think the newer guard, the people who are becoming trained, now these days, they're much more aware of what is going on. The people who are doing the marital and family therapy, sex therapy, it's almost inescapable. The non-monogamy piece is an inescapable component of that. But certainly the older generations did not get any kind of, literally no training whatsoever on non-monogamy. If anything about non-monogamy was even mentioned, it was in a negative context, and often in the context of infidelity. And so, and of course, what therapists get to see are all the cases where things are not working out.
Right.
And so without the knowledge that this could work out if you do it in this and this and this way. But if you're doing it in this and this and this way, it's not going to work out. But that's all they get to see. And so without having that other piece to balance it out, they just think this never works out. And so, that's why it's really important for people who are going to try to be open in some way and are working with a therapist or a counselor or coach, that they have someone who is knowledgeable and at least non-judgmental and open-minded and is willing to learn. Sometimes, depending on where you are, what the options available are, you might end up having to educate your therapist on these things, give them some of the books, give them some of the courses, and hope that
I've done that actually. We've it's so interesting because the lens that most of these professionals, as you kind of mentioned, are hearing about non-monogamy through is when couples turn up or singles turn up in crisis mode. So of course, I've shared about this before, and I can't remember when or why, but Posh and I have been in therapy for years, off and on. And I say for years. We went once, had nothing to do with non-monogamy. We got back on track like so fast, 3-4 weeks of therapy. And we were like, oh, we're communicating. I was completely misunderstanding you, same. And we start to speak the same language again. Things are reignited. And the first time we went actually is because we were growing apart. I was getting deep into this, all kinds of spiritual work, which meant like a lot of celibacy. And he was growing his business in a different direction. And we were just like really not linking up and syncing up. So great, we go to therapy, things are great. We're like, great, we don't need therapy. So we stopped therapy for maybe 2 more years. And then we really got off track. We went back, had nothing to do with non-monogamy, of course. Well, I say of course, but for us it didn't, because that's always sort of been an easy piece of our relationship. And when we went back, it took us about 2 months and we were like, oh, this is our time. This is our couples coaching. We're not going to stop even when things get good, because now we can work on what's underneath all of these, issues, and we're not in crisis mode. So it's interesting. We've now been in therapy for a year and things are great. Of course, the onion, and we unravel sometimes and things are crappy sometimes, but we have this like beautiful objective person. And every now and then the open stuff will come up, mainly because we're like, we need to devote more time. We really want to build community. And we've found ourselves educating our therapist a bit. Not because she's awesome. She takes a lot of supplemental, I think, courses here and there. And she's very interested and curious. So she'll just ask us questions. And I think because of us, and we've recommended some, friends that are interested in being open. So I've experienced in that way where I haven't needed her for that thing. And I'm glad I haven't. But, to people who do, now they have resources. And like you said, there's a ton more books coming out, which is helpful, but it's not enough, so.
Yeah, we definitely need more education, and it's happening slowly. So as non-monogamy is becoming more of a thing, I mean, some of the research coming out, some of the surveys are finding, like YouGov has been, which has a nationally representative sample of Americans, has been coming out with data that finds something like 1/4 to 1/3 of Americans are interested in some form of non-monogamy. When you look at millennials, that number goes up to like 40%.
Yes.
And so we're talking about almost half of the new population coming up is going to need some information about how to do this, and is going to be doing it at least in some way, shape, or form. This is something that we're all going to have to be aware of and be able to have the language to talk about. Even if it's not your thing, you need to know what are the options, because the people that you go on dates with, it might be their thing. And it's something that you probably should make sure you're on the same page before going too deep into a relationship. And so these are just conversations that we are going to have to learn how to have, regardless of where on that spectrum we lie and exactly what type of relationship we would ideally want to have.
Yeah. Why do you think so many young people, I mean, I have my own ideas that I've talked about, but, millennials almost at 40%, and I think Gen Z is probably higher.
Actually, Gen Z is lower. Gen Z looks more like Gen X. Yeah.
Interesting. This is, I'm curious about your ideas and sort of, because I'm sure you look at a lot of research and sort of do a lot of research. What is the science behind people who trend towards more open? Like, why is the millennial generation wanting to sort of dismantle this, nuclear family situation and, the traditional mononormativity?
Well, the nuclear family is not antithetical to openness. In fact, I think what the vast majority of humans want is a stable, long-term loving relationship, but also not necessarily entirely sexually monogamous, that allows for some level of flexibility and openness on the side. So the two, people often see them as opposites. They really are not opposites. You can have a very sort of traditional, stable and nuclear type family, 2 parents and a couple of kids living in a house as a one unit, one family, except that on occasion the parents, go
Right.
have some parties or, go on some dates that the kids may never even know about, right?
Right.
It's just mommy and daddy are at a party.
Yeah.
What exactly they're doing at that party, you don't know.
Yeah.
So that's one myth that I really think is important to dispel, that bringing in more non-monogamy into our lives, the society, does not automatically mean taking away family.
Right.
For some people, it does. Certainly, if you have some more non-traditional forms of family, the polyamorous families can often look a bit, more less like the traditional family unit. And people who want to remain single and not actually live with any long-term partners, which can be another voluntary choice that some people make. So those certainly, and have some, have multiple partners in some way, shape, or form. So those are forms of non-monogamy that are, diverge from the traditional nuclear family, but many forms actually do not. And what we are finding in some of the research that we've been doing is that the majority of those who are interested in some type of non-monogamy are interested in it as an addition to a more traditional, long-term committed relationship.
Yeah.
And so, there are a lot of different things here we can unpack. You're asking why some people trend more this way, and then why millennials trend more this way. And I think those are actually two very different questions. Why some people trend more this way is because the main reason is because we differ on how much sexual and romantic novelty and variety we need. That's a spectrum. Our need for novelty, not just sexual novelty, the need for other forms of novelty as well. It's a personality characteristic that has very strong biological roots. Not everything, of course, about it is biological. Everything is in human psychology is a mix of biology and environment. But this is one of those traits that has a very strong genetic component, with some people who have, one version of these dopaminergic genes, because it all kind of comes down to the dopamine system in the brain, that reward circuitry in the brain. So some people who have one version of these genes are much more adventurous, sexually and non-sexually, than other people. So they need a lot more stimulation, variety, novelty, kind of excitement, mystery, risk, all of those kinds of experiences in order to be satisfied. And other people need a lot less stimulation before they start to feel like, oh my God, that's too much, overwhelming. I don't need all of that. I need a lot less. And so it's a spectrum that is more or less normally distributed. It's distributed in this bell-shaped curve where most people are somewhere in the middle. Some people are very low, some people are very high, but most people are in the middle. And so what that means on the sexual romantic novelty seeking trait is that most of us would like some level of novelty. That's not nothing. And the higher that novelty need is, the more likely it is that you want multiple partners, as well as other forms of sexual novelty. Of course, bringing in new partners is not the only way that you can have new experiences, various kinks, or, bring new toys, new positions, new locations, role play. All of those things are ways of bringing novelty, but nothing is as novel as a new person.
Right.
And so the higher up you go on that need, the higher the likelihood that you want new people. And also because any one person, there's a limit to how many different things you can do with one person. One person has one set of interests and capabilities, physical, they have one type of body. So if you like to experience different kinds of bodies, or different kinds of activities that you can do with different people, then you need multiple people no matter what. And so that's this very kind of baseline difference that exists between humans in terms of how much of that novelty we need. And then, of course, that interacts as we grow up, that interacts with that biology. Those genes interact with what kind of environment we're placed in, what kind of rewards or punishments we get if we are adventurous or not adventurous. Do we have positive experiences with our early attempts at that kind of adventure, or do we get shut down and and not. And so both because of our society or just because of circumstances of how those things played out. And so that's why you're always going to have a variety of people. There's always going to be people for whom monogamy is actually a really good fit. People who don't need a lot of novelty and who got lucky to get paired up with someone who is a fairly good match for them. Right? So they're like, no, I'm happy. I don't need much more. And then you're going to have the super sluts like myself and other people who, no matter how well we're matched with this one person, that can never be enough. Right? And then there are going to be the majority of people somewhere in the middle who, depending on what's going on. But so that's one reason that that's a major reason why we differ on an individual basis. Now, if you go in and look into, okay, well, why do you see these different generational trends? Like why millennials are most likely and Gen Zs are similar to Gen X's.
I'm so shocked about the Gen Z thing. So I can't wait to hear what you're going to share. I'm just like, what? Thought they would just keep growing and getting more and more open.
Yeah, well, yes and no. So I think a couple of things are going on. Obviously, both millennials and Gen Zs are part of this fairly more progressive world that we live in today compared to the Gen Xers. So at least on that social stigma side of things, they don't feel it as much. So they feel like they have the luxury of rebelling against those traditional norms and explore different things. The difference then, however, between the millennials and the Gen Zs are millennials have had a chance to see that monogamy doesn't actually work in many cases. They've had the chance to be in these long-term relationships over a period of time and see the limitations of monogamy.
Interesting.
Gen Zs are still young. They don't know.
They believe in the fairy tale still?
Exactly. The fairy tale is still in their minds a possibility. Yeah. So I think that is probably the biggest factor leading into that. I also think Gen Zs are growing up in a very uncertain time and they have very little stability right now. There are a lot of changes going on. There's a lot of political instability in our country. There's a lot of economic instability in our country. There's a lot of
technology.
Technology
is so fast.
There are all these changes that we're seeing with, for example, gender transitioning, people transitioning in gender. So there's just a lot of things moving and a lot of that uncertainty, unpredictability. And so probably to some extent, Gen Z is not yet going for or showing interest in non-monogamy is probably the fact that they're already feeling that lack of stability and security. Whereas millennials are a little older, so they've had a chance to, even though, yes, the world is fairly uncertain, but they have managed to at least create some level of security and stability for themselves so they can now focus on that exploration side of things.
That's so interesting and such a really good point. I didn't really think about things that way. Because, I'm a millennial and, some of my ideas are so many millennials saw their parents try monogamy and get divorced. And, that's just like my perspective. I never imagined being open until it sort of happened by accident. And then I was like, I can never really, if I can have that, I don't want to go back. But I think that's really interesting. And now I'm like, okay, let's wait and see what happens. Like, I'm curious now in 10 to 15 years, if Gen Z will still trend towards that or, once they age, want to be a bit more open. And
yeah, I'm really curious to see that shift. And I also think there's another factor that is worth mentioning that, as you were saying, millennials saw monogamy not working through their parents. But what a lot of Gen Zs are seeing are this hookup culture and non-monogamy not working, because a lot of millennials are trying non-monogamy and fucking it up because nobody teaches them how to do it well. And as I said, it's really bad. Like non-monogamy, monogamy can be bad, but it's bad in that like very frustrating kind of you're sitting with this just dissatisfying thing, but things are not blowing up necessarily. Whereas with non-monogamy, if you're doing non-monogamy badly, you are really leaving a lot of victims in your wake, and there's just explosions of
that's so true
of mess that you're creating. And so I think what the Gen Zs are seeing are all of these people, all of these millennials who tried these different forms of open relationships and hurt themselves, hurt other people really badly. And so, and I think, and also just the whole, there's now seems like more and more this shift toward back to traditional, or more calls by more people, men and women, calling for kind of going back to more traditional values. I don't know if you read the book, The Case Against the Sexual Revolution, for example. that people are looking at, the sexual revolution and sort of that move toward casual sex and hookup culture that is not necessarily serving a lot of people, especially not serving women, and also creates a lot of possibility for consent violations. And now that we're a lot more aware of the importance of consent, I think those are some of these forces pushing people away from this unbridled kind of without guardrails, kind of unrestricted sexuality. And in my opinion, the problem isn't that we have allowed for this sexual openness and freedom to exist, is that we haven't done it well. Because the way the sexual revolution from the 60s onwards and into these, hookup culture years that we've been living through in the past like 10, 20 years, we have not been doing that well.
Yeah.
My work from the very beginning was on casual sex. That was my dissertation at Cornell, that I looked at the relationship between casual sex and mental health and well-being. And so I've been working on casual sex and the sexual freedom. And the lesson there over and over again has been, casual sex in and of itself is not the problem. It's doing it poorly. That's the problem. And there are so many ways that casual sex can be done poorly, again, in a way that hurts you or other people. And yet that's how most of the experiences end up happening for people, because nobody teaches us how to do casual sex well.
Right.
They just tell us, don't do it, it's bad. And if you're doing it, then you're doing it drunk or high, you're not communicating, you are not really being honest with each other about what your intentions are, you are doing it with a lot of disrespect for other people doing it with you, because it's this bad thing and only bad people do it, either assholes, for the men it's like, the assholes are into that, and for the women, the damaged, poor sluts with daddy issues are doing it. And so there's all of these factors that determine whether you're going to have a good experience with casual sex. And monogamy is no different. They're very, similar in this regard. All of these factors that are going to determine whether this casual sex or this non-monogamy is going to be a positive, healthy experience or a negative, unhealthy experience end up being done in ways that go into the negative and not the positive, because people don't do it well. And so the answer in my mind is not shut it all down and go back to family, traditional family values. Is no, let's actually learn and teach people how to do it well, so that when we are giving ourselves that sexual freedom, we're not hurting ourselves and other people.
Yes, I agree 1,000,000%. It's so true. I mean, all of this is happening still in a society that's not very accepting of it as well. So no matter how liberated, or sometimes even how much education you have around it, there's still going to be the shame piece that you bring to all of it, and which is a lot of like what I've worked on over the last couple of years. And so we're in many ways still at like the forefront of all of this. But then I often think about how, and I'm curious, like your thoughts on this, because now we live our lives in such a public way and everything is online and documented, it can feel like non-monogamy is this brand new thing for people, but it's also like, no, I think that this has been happening just like in secret, and, you know, maybe not to the level, but, you know, whether it's, you know, swingers or open couples, even polyamory, like the whole spectrum of it, it's been happening. It's just that, you know, there was like zero acceptance or tolerance, like there was no safety around it, zero education or role models or, you know, anything from an educator to an influencer speaking about it. And so as much as it's new, it's like everything has been taboo and like under the rug for such a long time that now the people who are talking about it and who've been talking about it, you know, for like 20 years, somebody like, I just interviewed Kendra Stevens, you know, I don't know if you know her, but she's, you know, been open and poly for about 20 years and has, you know, courses and education around this. And she's like, girl, we've been doing it for a long time. And it's like, yes, but how much of that was censored? You know, you have to look really hard to find. And now, you know, you can kind of like just hashtag something and the whole world opens up. So I often wonder, you know, about that, because there have been people practicing, but now we're finally in a place where you can share, but you still have to code everything, like even in your bio. Like I got banned on Instagram a couple months ago for a week, you know, thankfully, like knock on wood, and then just like popped back with no explanation of anything.
Yeah, the censorship is awful. Yeah, I've been getting, shadow banned and all that, which is why we do all the censorship of all the bad words. And it's really unfortunate how much censorship there is right now on social. So on one hand, yeah, supposedly we can be anything and say anything, but so much of it we can't. So but that's a whole other question.
A
whole episode about censorship. The question of like how common has this been in past years? Obviously, it's very difficult to know because we don't have research.
We didn't document.
We did not document this. And it's fairly likely that the forms of non-monogamy that we have today were not very common in the past, primarily because we had 12,000 years of patriarchy up until yesterday. And in patriarchy, a lot of men, especially those who were lucky enough to be kind of higher status and have more money or other forms of status, were afforded the ability to be non-monogamous. They often had their courtesans and other forms of or multiple wives, right? So something like 75% of non-Western societies back in the day were polygynous.
Wow.
So men were allowed to have multiple wives.
That's a big number.
That's 75%. A very big, 75%. Now, not all the men in these societies would have multiple wives. Only the ones who could afford to get multiple wives would get them. But that was an option for men. It was almost never an option for women. There are very few societies that are polyandrous, where women can have multiple husbands, and that's something like 1% of these societies. And many of those, it's not like the women have the power in these societies. It's actually the reason why and how these societies end up being polyandrous is due to geographical and kind of logistical reasons. It's typically they are in these high plains of the high mountains of Tibet and Nepal, where arable land is very scarce. And so instead of breaking it up to all the brothers in a family, and eventually they would not have anything left, they would keep it all in one family by all brothers marrying one wife.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, whether she liked it or not, whether she liked all the brothers or not. So, so
I did not know this.
Yeah. So basically for these 12,000 years of patriarchy, women have had very little negotiating power to say, I want some too. So what we've had is the men either very openly by taking wives, sometimes openly by taking mistresses of different kinds, which was sanctioned, even if not a legal piece of paper that it's another wife. It was sort of allowed and understood that they could and would have mistresses, or they were just cheating because they had much more opportunity to cheat than the wives. And the women, on the other hand, probably the only avenue that they had was some form of cheating here and there, by risking a lot.
Yes.
Sometimes their lives or their freedom, because they would go to jail, or they would get killed, or they would certainly get divorced and then left alone.
Right,
which
with no resources.
exactly was almost a death sentence, because families would not take them back because of the shame that they've brought onto the families. And so, non-monogamy was always there, in the sense that whenever people could get away with it, they found ways to do it in some way. But probably there wasn't this on any meaningful large scale couples, heterosexual couples, going and openly negotiating, having sex with other people, having, orgies and sex parties, and that those kinds of experiences probably did exist. But I would bet an arm that they were very, very rare.
Very limited.
So that's a luxury that we have now, because women have a lot more power, a lot more negotiating power, because you're starting to dismantle the patriarchy. And so now wives can say, I want some too.
Yeah.
Let's talk about how I can get some. Just like we can talk about how you can get some. And we've built, over the last century or so, we've built these more egalitarian expectations that if the guys can do something, well, then the women kind of need to have the same freedom, and that it's just as unacceptable for the men to have multiple partners as that's kind of how it initially happened, right? The first change was not giving women the same power or the same freedoms that men had. We actually took away the freedoms that men had by saying, no, you now have to be monogamous.
Right.
Just like the women are monogamous, you have to be monogamous too, because of these equal kind of norms. And now that we're realizing, that doesn't quite work for the men or for the women.
I can't do it. Sorry. Yeah.
Now we're realizing, okay, what we need to do is, the egalitarian norms, but equally open and give equal levels of freedom to both.
Yeah. What I appreciate about this is you're speaking about infidelity or cheating or whatever else you'd want to call it, even if it's like a known thing that's happening between these two partners. Also non-monogamy, just a different form of it. It's not a consensual form of it. And you've said before, and this is something that really struck me, I think it's the first time where I'm like, I have to have her on my show. So I'm going to just DM her. Where you said that if we could start to think in terms of including infidelity under the non-monogamy umbrella, it would lead to more healing for people. And can you expand on that a bit?
Sure. Yeah, this is a contentious topic indeed. The non-monogamy, the consensual non-monogamy community is very unhappy about thinking of infidelity as a form of non-monogamy. They really want to keep them separate. And sure, they're separate in the sense that one is done with the consent of and approval of everyone involved, and the other one is not. But that doesn't determine whether something is monogamy or non-monogamy. Monogamy and non-monogamy literally mean having one partner versus having multiple partners. Exactly how you're having those multiple partners matters to how I might feel about that, or you might feel about that. But if I have multiple partners, I have multiple partners. I'm non-monogamous. If I have one partner, I'm monogamous, right? So both monogamy and non-monogamy can come in this consensual, intentional, negotiated version, and kind of a coerced and or unintentional and non-consensual version. But ultimately, it is all, when we have multiple partners, regardless of how we've gotten those partners, that is a form of non-monogamy. And then we can break it up into the different subtypes of non-monogamy, but ultimately it's all non-monogamy. And I think the healing part is important, or the healing part would be enhanced by us admitting that, because for the most part, these are expressions of the same basic need, the need for novelty, sexual novelty. And sexual satisfaction, sexual fulfillment. The other thing, as you were asking earlier, why do some people gravitate toward non-monogamy less than others. For some people, it's not necessarily so much that need for novelty. It's the fact that they are partnered with someone who's just not meeting their, even the more basic, even the low novelty needs, right? When you have people who are partnered with someone with very different sex drives.
Right.
Like if I have a higher sex drive for you, but you don't want to have sex with me, even if I just want one person, but that person doesn't want to, like, I still have those needs. And so I might want to outsource those needs elsewhere. Or if I'm kinky and you're not, but I have if you were kinky, then you would be enough to meet that need. But because you're not, I need to go elsewhere and meet that need. And so both negotiated and non-negotiated non-monogamy are an expression of one of these two needs. Either I have these sexual novelty needs that no one person, even the most perfect partner, can meet, perfect for me, or I'm in a relationship that is lacking in the ability to meet even some of my, one person type sexual and romantic needs. And so I need to outsource them elsewhere. If we create first of all, if we acknowledge that we all have these needs and that they're valid needs that we need to be able to at least talk about and hopefully address in some way and meet in some way, then we are creating more opportunity for them to be met in this negotiated way, as opposed to in that non-negotiated way. But they're an expression of the same thing. If we create a world where there is no acceptable, ethical, consensual, negotiated way of meeting them, then you're going to have more people meeting those needs in the non-negotiated way and taking all of the risks that come with it, social, personal, interpersonal. If we create a world where these needs can be discussed and acknowledged and hopefully find a way to meet them, then we're going to create less of a need for infidelity. So I think by incorporating infidelity under the non-monogamy umbrella, we are actually creating the circumstances to reduce the number of cases of infidelity and increase likely the cases of negotiated non-monogamy.
And I think too, and decrease the cases of divorce in many, many situations, which lead to less broken up families and things like that. I mean, I always say, I don't believe non-monogamy is for everyone, and I'm not advocating for it. I know it works for me, and I know that I see my marriage having a lot more success and fulfillment because we've chosen this. And when I first we were doing it in secret for a long time just because of my shame and inability to own it. My husband was always I don't care. Okay, great. But I would follow a lot of times the work of Esther Perel and just loving everything she spoke. And it always struck me that, she would say things like people just throw out perfectly good marriages because their needs aren't being met. And that was one of the first times that I was oh, that's what we're already doing without even realizing it. And, for us, it was sort of how we started without a lot of conscious sort of agreement or understanding. We always talked about things, but it was just very early on. We were wow, that was fun. Let's do it again. Do you want to do it again? Sure. Figuring it out. But then it started to click for me of other people are probably doing it as well. I don't have to be so closeted and taboo. And then realizing how you can really enrich so many other parts of your life that make it more fulfilling. And, it's had me look at sort of marriage, divorce, infidelity in all of these different ways, because of course, now that I'm growing and, I'm nearing 40, I'm seeing all the different types of non-monogamy in all of my community, the whole spectrum. And I try to just think about, the more we can educate, the more we can share our own stories, the more people can sort of feel safe to try and to come out and to do it differently, to touch on patriarchy. I think that, and I think many people would agree it's also such a disservice to men as well. It's, it's not working for anyone on the planet. But I find that hopefully infidelity, because it's such a tied to patriarchy in that way, will, as we open up to these forms of consensual non-monogamy, hopefully a lot of like men can heal as well, because they've had the freedom for sure to do these things. It's way more acceptable, or at least in my perspective, it's way more acceptable for a man to cheat than a woman, right, in society. But it still doesn't mean that like these men don't have shame. Yeah. And even though they did it, they were looking for something, right? Likely lacking intimacy. I'm not giving anyone a free pass, by the way. I always like to put myself in someone else's shoes. Like, why does this person, man or woman or anything in between, like not feel safe to just say, hey, I'd like to explore non-monogamy? Like, why can't you open up to your partner or someone you're dating? And it's likely just because they don't see it happening in a healthy way.
Yeah, and they fear the rejection and the negative reaction that might come their way. We just did with Ashley Madison, we commissioned a survey by YouGov, so independent, nationally representative survey, where we asked about different fantasies that people had. And then we asked them if they felt comfortable sharing those fantasies with their primary partners. And 45% of partnered Americans said that they did not feel very comfortable sharing their fantasies with their primary partners. 45, that's like half almost of the population. And about 3% were not satisfied with the sexual aspects of their relationship. So you have almost 50% of people in long-term relationships in America currently not being very satisfied with their sex lives and not feeling comfortable sharing their sexual fantasies. Damn. And I think that's just so sad. Yeah. So sad, because there is so much value that comes from being able to have those conversations and have a fulfilling sex life. That's a key component of broader relationship satisfaction in maintaining stability and security long-term in a relationship. People who are sexually happy in the relationships are much more likely to be happy in other aspects and to want to continue being together. So if we were to open up a bit more and start sharing more and improving our sex lives, which just for some people might mean also opening up, for other people not. From other people it might be bringing in some kink stuff or bringing other forms of novelty that do not involve other people but still scratch that novelty itch in some other way. Then we would actually be helping those family values that the conservatives want to uphold by making sure more families stay together, more kids grow up with two parents, and so on. Because the divorce really, people think, oh, you as or me and other people who talk about non-monogamy as an option, that we don't value marriage and long-term relationships, and we don't care much that the divorce rate is high. I actually do care. I agree with the conservatives that this is not okay, that we have so much divorce, that we have all these broken families. It is better for kids to grow up in a stable home that stays more or less in the same format for the entirety of their childhood. So I honestly see non-monogamy as a way to keep more families together, because very often, infidelity plays. I just saw some data somewhere. I don't know if that was a nationally representative sample, but that 50% of the divorces, at least one of the reasons that was implicated in divorce was infidelity. And how many of those relationships could have been saved had this been communicated and the person who needed to step out had an acceptable outlet to step out without that destroying the marriage. So yeah, I really have high hopes but we have to learn how to do it well. Right. We really have to learn how to do it well.
Yeah. It's so true. I mean, I see a lot of gatekeeping in the non-monogamy space, as I'm sure like you do too. And I did an episode about this a little while ago, and it's like, yes, of course, like it's tough. No one's going to do it perfect. But the people who've been doing it for a while are like, don't pee in our pool. Like, we're doing it well, you know, and like, you can't do it until you figure it all out. But I think there is such a balance of it because, you know, everyone's like, oh, well, you have to practice something and you're going to fuck it up. And it's like, practice makes perfect. And it's like, perfect practice makes perfect. Like, inform yourself and, you know, try to come into things with as much knowledge as possible.
Right.
That's why, you know, you have talked about this and so many other educators that I really admire. Like, the number one thing that they share is like, go slow. You have to like, you know, dive into the end of the pool. The deep end.
Yeah, although there too are individual differences. Some people are really the kind of people who want to dive into the deep end from the get-go. But you have to be aware that carries higher risks for both yourself and other people to end up getting hurt. So are you both okay with that? You know, and some people can take on more and other people need to go at a slower pace. So those are all some of the things that we discuss actually in the course. Like, what kind of person are you? Do you need to go faster or slower? And also depending on a lot of different things, personality differences, your background, what kind of experiences you've had in the past, positive, negative, with these different forms. You know, what is your social circle like? How much shame and stigma do you have around it? How much jealousy do you feel? Because jealousy is a spectrum too. Some of us are very jealous. Some of us are not jealous at all. And so the risks are different depending on where you are on that spectrum. And of course, you're not going to do it perfect, even if you have all of the information in the world. You know, you go through the whole Open Smarter course. Of course, you're still going to fuck up. And there's always going to be a level of trial and error. It's just that ideally, you're not doing that trial and error completely blindly, right? There is some guidance, some information. And then also, even when you do fuck up, then you can look at it and be like, oh, okay, I see what I did there. You can actually process it in a way that helps you not do it again. Very often you're going to have the experience of fucking up, but yourself, you know, you're not going to learn from a course or from other people who've done the same. You're going to have to make the mistake. But then ideally, the knowledge that you have gathered through books and courses and podcasts and all that is going to give you the knowledge to process it appropriately, communicate it with your partner, and then create the guardrails to prevent it from happening again.
I love that. I always call it bumper lanes.
Yeah, bumper lanes. I like that.
Wow, we've covered so much. I really appreciate your time because I'm like, this is everything I wanted to talk about.
Amazing.
Okay, one last thing. So, I mean, because I know a little bit about you, I know that, you know, growing up, you grew up in Macedonia, right? Yeah, you had a pretty like sexually liberated sort of experience from a young age. And so, you know, I imagine just from you sharing, like it has been easier for you. You went in to study these topics, you know, easier in whatever way we want to talk about that. But for someone who, you know, is listening to the show, is growing up, whatever, conservative Christian American, who's like, wow, as much as I might want these things, I'm never going to be able to like say openly. I joked with you earlier, like, yeah, I want to have an orgy, or like, I want to have a gangbang.
Right.
You know, what advice do you have for someone who, you know, doesn't have that sexual confidence or self-esteem, but who really wants to work towards it?
Yeah. Again, there are going to be a lot of individual differences in terms of how much people want something and also how rebellious they might be to go against the grain. Because I did have from a very early age a very liberated experience because I literally just like pushed that through in a world that was very anti all of that. So I suffered a lot of social stigma and bullying and having a reputation and all of that. I mean, I just decided that I was gonna that living an authentic life was more important than being liked.
It was worth it
by all of these people. And I kind of had a feeling that I was going to leave, that I was not going to stay in Macedonia, that I was going to live in New York because that's where I knew I could be free.
Yeah.
From a very early age, from I was like 9 or so, I dreamt of living in New York City. And, you know, here I am living in New York City. But
not only living in New York City, you're teaching at NYU.
Yeah.
Like the most New York thing you can do.
Yeah. Those girls' dreams came true. And so we're all going to have our little kind of story around how much we're willing to go against the grain. So go as slow as you need to go and be as careful about it as you need to be. So people who are just kind of starting to get curious and still having a lot of fear of rejection or stigma or having a lot of shame, just start slow by reading, by listening, by connecting with people online. There are a lot of different communities, sex positive communities, in the US and in person as well as online. So just kind of start by getting to know people and having some of these conversations. One of the easiest and most reliable way to de-shame yourself is to be surrounded by people who are supportive and non-judgmental. Because the reason we have shame is because other people told us that wanting those things are bad. And so the way to de-shame it is to find people who are going to tell us, no, that's not bad. That's okay. Yeah. And so, but the more of those role models that you have, ideally people who are more similar to you, who come from similar backgrounds as you, and yet have made that leap.
Right.
So yeah, that would be kind of the first line, connecting with other people without doing anything, right? You don't have to dive in.
Right. Just get into community with people that you want to sort of be more like in that way. Yeah.
So education through all of these different ways, reading, listening to podcasts, taking courses, whatever it is. So to get the information that you need so that you can feel comfortable that what you want to do, even if it is riskier, than what you've been taught is okay, you have the tools to do it in a way that's relatively safe. And so that gives you confidence that it's, or you will know how to do it when time comes. And then the other piece is that community that says it's okay. Yeah. It's okay to do it.
And that's sort of part of it. That's sort of the education and not arming yourself, but equipping yourself with like more tools and more resources so that when you do it well.
Yeah. And many of these things are things that you really don't have to do anything for a while. For example, if you're someone who wants an orgy or a gangbang or whatever, you don't have to start by creating one or making one for yourself. Go to a play party and just watch. Just watch. Yeah. Go to 5 play parties and just watch and don't do anything. Just meet people and talk to them.
Right.
Stay fully clothed.
Yeah.
And just watch other people do it and figure out, oh, that looks fun. Oh, that doesn't look fun. I would like to do it this way. Oh, I wouldn't like to do it that way. Yeah. Meet different kinds of people. Talk to them about their experiences. Have you had an orgy? Well, how was it?
Right.
Have you had an orgy? Well, how was it? What would you say are some on the to-do list versus not to-do list?
Yeah. It's so very true. I've shared this a bunch, but I rarely play at parties, but I love them because it's like, that is part of the sexual experience for me that's really fulfilling. It's like being in an environment where people are experiencing pleasure. I enjoy watching sometimes so much more than receiving or like being involved. And so many people, I think, don't even think that that's an option when they think about these types of experiences.
Yeah, all of those are options. All of those are options. Yeah, we collected some data of something like 2,000-3,000 people who've gone to a play party in the past year with a colleague at Widener, Brooke Wells. We never published those data, unfortunately, but we analyzed it and presented them at conferences. And there was a huge percentage of these people who were going to play parties, not so much to play, but because of the community aspect of it, because they wanted to be in an environment where they could feel sexually free and non-judged by others. And I mean, obviously, many people did it also to play or to meet people that they could play with elsewhere, but not at the party. Because playing at parties is a lot. Like there's overstimulation. There's a lot going on. So a lot of people are that's not their favorite kind of way or place to play, but it's a good place to meet people that you could play with on your own. And so you can use these environments in a lot of different ways to serve different purposes.
Absolutely. Yeah. For connection. I mean, I think that's why a ton of people go. It's like connection.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, amazing. I guess I want to ask this last question. I always think about non-monogamy in seasons, probably because I've been doing it for like a decade, but I think when people think about it, they're like, oh, it's going to be this one way. But But, I've had almost every different variation. So what season are you in of like non-monogamy right now?
Like my preferred type, or
your personal like relating experience now?
So right now I'm actually in an intentional celibacy period.
Ooh.
Yeah. For the most part, because I am writing a book about all of this, and I'm finding it much easier to focus on the book when I'm not out there dating or hooking up and trying to expend a lot of energy on that. So yeah, I'm kind of in a more like introverted, for the most part, intentional celibacy period that's probably going to go on for the next year. I think before this, I was in a 1.5 year long relationship that was monogamish, where we played with other people together. We went to a few parties, we invited a couple of women, then couples, and we kind of started slowly. We started with women first because that was easier for him to wrap his head around, and I was willing to be patient on that front, and then slowly expanded to couples. Yeah. And then I think if we had stayed together longer, we would have expanded to inviting just men in, but we didn't survive that long. Right. It ended before we got to that point. But that was a really kind of nice progression of that.
Amazing. Thank you for sharing your personal journey as well. I know that like there's so much to cover, and I appreciate your time. I want to know so much more about you, but we'll have to save it for next time. Yes, and I can't wait to hear more about the book. I'll be sharing Open Smarter as I've, told so many people about it already. We have a WhatsApp chat community called Open Talks, and where people can just sort of get like open coaching and ask questions, and I've shared it there and will continue to.
Amazing. Yeah, there's a free training that people can take, about an hour-long training that tells them kind of what the course is about, and also teaches them a lot about the different relationship options that they have and where they might gravitate towards depending on their own kind of unique personality. And so, please take the training, take the course. I look forward to seeing folks in there. And it's for anybody. It's not just for people interested in non-monogamy, actually. It's also people who are monogamous who've taken it, said, oh, this is really good about just getting to know yourself and how you are in relationships. People who are celibate or want to be celibate, they can also gain a lot. So it really is, it is predominantly geared toward folks who want to open up, but people in other relationship configurations can benefit quite a bit.
I'm so glad that you shared that actually and put that sort of button on it, because I think that's like one of the most important things that people can understand, and that I hear a lot from listeners who are monogamous or somewhere where they don't even feel like trending towards open, where they're like, wow, this has up-leveled my, communication skills with my partner and helped me understand how to ask for things that I want that my partner can provide, and needs that my partner can meet, or things that I've been inspired now to do for my partner to create novelty. And so that's always feels like such a big win for me as well. Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah. As I said, so many people, almost half of the population in America is not fully satisfied. And so there's a lot of room for people who want to maintain a monogamous relationship to do it better. Right. And this course really just helps you get to know yourself better, get to know your partner better, and then find these points of overlap and develop the skills that you need to create more win-win scenarios with each other.
Totally. I one last thing I have to say, because you were talking about this earlier, and I was like, oh, absolutely. How, if we had better sexual health and sexual fulfillment, all of the other areas of our lives would be better, right? And I think in non-monogamy, I used to be, actually less now, but guarded against people who assume that it's all about the sex, right? Which isn't bad. Like, if it's all about the sex for you, amazing. Right. But it's always like, when you're trying to do this, podcast, and it's like, oh, I just want to be slutty. And I'm like, yeah, but it's like also not all about the sex, but it should be. It should
be okay to be all about the sex.
It should be okay to be all about the sex. And if it was all about the sex, like, I think the world would be a more peaceful place. Like, if people were like well fucked, we'd be in a really good situation.
Yeah, absolutely. So. Yeah, that has always bothered me. There's always that little rift between poly people and like swinger people, with the poly people being like, oh, it's just about the sex for you, and we're somehow better because it's not just about sex, it's also about love. And I think that's just so silly to be going at each other. Like, there's nothing wrong with it being but just about the sex. And if you also want it to be about other things, great. That's also okay. Although honestly, that makes things more complicated.
Yeah.
And
emotions.
So, that's why the swingers, their job is, well, for you, actually, you don't get any sex. You spend all the time talking about all the emotional stuff, and you barely get laid. So, I don't know.
Yeah. One time we went on vacation to Bali with a big group of friends. It was early on in our relationship with Lauren, now my partner. And the three of us were in partnership for like a year, and we hardly had sex. I mean, we had sex like 2 times in like 13 days. Because it was sort of one of the first times where we realized like, oh, we have a relationship agreement, Pasha and I, but we've never set that up with Lauren. Like, we were brand new to it. So she, things happened that she was just like, oh my gosh, I never prepared for this. And this makes me really, uncomfortable. And, we had to work through so much in this beautiful paradise where we all imagined that we would be just like having sex
all the time. Oh man.
Yeah. But,
sorry about that. Also, rest in peace, Bali. We won't be able to go there.
I know.
Anymore.
Oh my God, you're right.
If we want to have sex with someone we're not married to.
Yeah.
It's very sad.
It's wild that we, you always, I have to start using my statements, feel like we are making so much progress, and then, you see something like that. There's so much progress, and then like the overturn of Roe. Mm-hmm. But I try not to be doom and gloom, because I feel like, okay, this is how life works. 2 steps forward, 1 step back all the time. And so, we get to be vigilant and like
keep at it.
Play our part.
Exactly.
Sharing. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.